Some lives aren't just lived, they kind of echo through history, and they reflect the struggles and the triumphs of a whole era. So today, we're going to dive into one of those lives, the story of Jared Maurice Arter, a man whose journey from a slave cabin to a college presidency, well, it pretty much sums up a huge, turbulent chapter of the American story. So this is the very first line of his own autobiography, Echoes from a Pioneer Life, right from the get-go. No fancy words, no trying to soften the blow, just a stark, powerful fact that sets the stage for an absolutely incredible journey. I mean, to be born a slave in 1850 was to be born into a world of unimaginable constraints. But his story is all about breaking every single one of them. His life began, and this is no exaggeration, forged in the fire of a nation that was just on the brink of collapse. He was born in a tiny one-room log cabin in Jefferson County, West Virginia, a border state that was about to be torn apart by the coming war. So you see, his story isn't just his own. In a lot of ways, it's the story of America itself being reforged. And the people who shaped him in those earliest years, well, they were a real study in contrasts. You've got his father, Jeremiah, who was literate, which was a rare and frankly dangerous skill for a slave to have. And he was good with numbers. Then there's his mother, Hannah. She was illiterate, but everyone described her as incredibly intelligent, deeply religious, and just queenly. So right from the beginning, his world was this mix of intellect and faith, of practical skills and deep spirit, all in the depths of bondage. For young Jared, history wasn't something he'd read about in a dusty old book years later. No way. It was happening right outside his cabin door. It was loud, it was violent, and it was absolutely impossible to ignore. He was a first-hand witness to the events that would rip the nation apart. And this timeline, wow, it just lays it all out, doesn't it? Think about it. At 9 years old, he sees the fallout from John Brown's famous raid on Harper's Ferry. By the time he's 11, the Civil War has exploded. And at 13, he's finally freed by the Emancipation Proclamation. These weren't just distant headlines for him. These were the defining moments of his childhood. Can you even imagine that? As a 9-year-old boy, holding on to his mother's apron for safety, watching the public execution of men who had tried to start a rebellion to free people like him? This wasn't some abstract conflict. It was a terrifying, visceral reality that he saw with his own 2 eyes. And the danger was just constant. He writes that on 2 separate occasions, for weeks on end, his family's home was caught smack in the middle of the firing lines. He describes having to hide in the cellar for safety and says you could, quote, scarcely venture to go to the spring, woodpile, or garden without being shot at. That was the nerve-wracking soundtrack to his childhood. So after emancipation, a new chapter begins. And this chapter is defined by one central theme: this relentless, unquenchable thirst for the education that had been denied to him and to his people for centuries. Okay, you have to hear the story behind this slide. Shortly after he was freed, Jared went to get a job as a hotel bellboy, but he was turned down flat because he couldn't read numbers. Now, did he give up? Nope, not a chance. He went home, got his brother-in-law to teach him the numbers that very same night, walked back to the hotel the next morning, and got the job. That single-minded drive is everything you need to know to understand his life. You gotta understand, his path to a real education was anything but a straight line. It was a long, winding, difficult road. He learned what he could from his dad, was forced to learn numbers just to get a job, and then he was sent north as an apprentice. For years, he worked these grueling manual labor jobs, shucking corn in the snow, chopping wood, working in rolling mills, doing whatever it took to support his family and buy them a home. It wasn't until he was 23 years old that he finally got to realize his dream and enter Storr College. And even when he got into a formal school, man, it was harsh. He tells this story about his first teacher. Jared didn't sit down fast enough, so the teacher just hurled a large book at him. It hit him right between the eyes and knocked him to the floor. The lesson he learned from that? Absolute, unquestioning obedience. It's a pretty stark reminder of the kind of strict and often brutal discipline of the time. But here's the thing about Arter. He didn't go through all that just for himself. He saw education as a tool, as a foundation that he could use to build institutions for his community. He was literally building a future from scratch, not just for himself, but for generations of people to come. And this This became the big one, the defining chapter of his professional life. After years of teaching and ministry work, he takes over the leadership of this small, struggling school for African Americans. It was a challenge that was going to test every single bit of resilience he had built up over a lifetime. And that test came almost immediately. I mean, just 2 weeks after he becomes president, the main school building burns to the ground. Total ruin. In a moment that would have broken most people, students and teachers were weeping, asking, "What are we going to do now?" Arthur's response was instant and unwavering. "Let us rise and build better." And boy, did he ever. Just look at this comparison. It tells the whole story. He takes over an institution with 4 acres of land that was just granted to them, a single frame building, and $4,000 of debt. Through just relentless fundraising and really savvy leadership, when he leaves, they have 50 acres of their own deed and land, a brand new 4-story brick building, and $20,000 in net assets. He literally turned a disaster into a foundation for the future. So later in his life, Arthur sits down and puts all of his experiences and his philosophy into his autobiography. And in it, he leaves behind this lasting message, a real vision for the future of his race that's all grounded in his belief in faith, education, and duty. Now, to really get his core message, you have to understand this one term. In his writing, Arthur often uses the biblical word Ethiopia. He's not talking about the modern country we know today. For him, it was a powerful historical synonym for the African people or the Negro race as a whole. And this quote right here, this is the centerpiece of his message to the race. It's actually a prophecy from the Psalms that he saw as a divine promise. To him, it meant that his people, after centuries of suffering, were destined for this huge spiritual and social awakening, that they were reaching for a higher purpose. So, how were they going to get there? Well, Arthur laid out a pretty clear path to progress. First and foremost, number 1 was faith in God. Number 2 was education. Number 3 was patriotism and loyalty to America, even with all its flaws. And number 4 was the importance of the family and building a strong home. For him, progress wasn't just about money or politics. It was a moral and spiritual journey built on these pillars. And when he looked back at it all, from his perspective, this was the result. Despite all the immense obstacles, the prejudice, the violence, Jared Arthur looked back at the 50-plus years since emancipation, and he saw a story of achievement that was just unprecedented. He was so incredibly proud, declaring that the progress his people had made in such a short time had, quote, no parallel in history. So we end right back where we started, with the title of his book, Echoes from a Pioneer Life. And it really makes you ask the question, what does a life like Jared Arthur's leave behind? It's more than just a school building or a book, right? It's an echo of resilience. It's a testament to the power of faith and the absolute unyielding pursuit of knowledge against all odds. And it's a reminder of what can be built from the ashes.